Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I don't even know where to begin, truly. It feels like I've lived an entire lifetime in the span of a few months, a condensed epic of soaring highs and the kind of crushing lows you read about but never think will happen to you. The story, I guess, has a title in my head, a clickbait headline for my own private catastrophe. So goated that she cheated in her 7-year relation for me. It sounds arrogant, doesn't it? It sounds like a brag. But sitting here now, in the deafening silence of the last 48 hours, it feels more like an epitaph for my own naivety, a monument to a spectacular failure of judgment. It all started this year, though it feels like a different era. For 2 years, she was just a face in the periphery, another student in my class, a collection of features I could recognize but had never really seen. Her name was a word, not a sound that could make my heart skip a beat. She existed in the same space, breathed the same stale lecture hall air, but we were on different planets. I was navigating my own world of assignments, late-night study sessions, and the low-grade hum of anxiety about the future, a future that felt both terrifyingly vast and disappointingly mundane. I was thinking about my credit score, about the vague notion of getting a decent job, maybe one day making an investment in something, anything, that would give me a foothold in the world. Real estate was a fantasy, a word thrown around by adults who seemed to have their lives figured out. My reality was a cramped rental with two other guys and a constant, low-level worry about money that clung to me like a second skin. Love wasn't on the agenda. It felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, a risk my emotional portfolio wasn't prepared to handle. I'd seen friends go through brutal heartbreaks, the kind that left them hollowed out and cynical, and I was in no hurry to join their ranks. My focus was on survival, on building a foundation for myself, brick by boring brick. Then March happened. I don't remember what triggered the first conversation. It was probably something trivial, a question about a textbook or a shared complaint about a professor. But it wasn't the topic that mattered. It was the spark. It was the way her eyes lit up when she talked, the way a small smile played on her lips even when she was complaining. It was a chemical reaction, an instant recalibration of my entire universe. Suddenly, she wasn't just a face in the crowd anymore. She was the crowd. All the background noise of my life faded into a dull murmur, and she was the only clear sound. We started talking more, finding excuses to sit next to each other, our conversations spilling out of the classroom and into long walks across campus. Each interaction was a revelation. I learned about her dreams, her fears, the little quirks that made her who she was. And with every shared secret, with every laugh that echoed between us, I felt myself falling. It wasn't a gentle descent. It was a free fall, a complete and utter surrender. I was all in. I was making the biggest, most reckless investment of my life, and I didn't even care to read the prospectus. The feeling was intoxicating, a potent cocktail of hope and adrenaline. I was so consumed by her that everything else became secondary. The anxieties about debt, the pressure to secure a future, it all seemed manageable with her by my side. She became the answer to questions I didn't even know I was asking. She was the missing piece, the unexpected variable that made the entire equation of my life make sense. On April 24th, I couldn't hold it in anymore. The pressure of my feelings had built up to a critical point, and I knew I had to take the risk. I confessed everything to her, my voice shaking, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I laid it all out, the depth of my affection, the way she had completely upended my world. And then the most terrifying and beautiful moment, she accepted. She said yes. That single word was a validation, a confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that this incredible connection I felt wasn't just a one-sided delusion. The world exploded into color. The days that followed were a blur of pure, unadulterated joy. We were inseparable, two halves of a whole that had finally found each other. We existed in our own little bubble, oblivious to the world outside. We had our first kiss in the college basement, a stolen moment surrounded by the smell of old books and dust, a place that had always been mundane but was now sacred ground. It was clumsy and perfect, and it sealed our fate. That was just the beginning. In the next 10 days, we explored a universe of kisses, quick, stolen pecks in crowded hallways, long, lingering embraces under the stars, passionate, desperate kisses that left us breathless and wanting more. Each one felt like a new discovery, a new chapter in our story. We were explorers charting an unknown territory, and every touch was a landmark. We became tourists in our own city, visiting places I'd lived near for years but had never truly seen. We'd go to museums and pretend to be art critics. We'd have picnics in the park. We'd take late-night drives with the windows down, singing along to the radio at the top of our lungs. We did all the romantic stuff you see in movies, the kind of things I used to scoff at but now embraced with a desperate sincerity. I was living a cliché, and it was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to me. She wrote me a love letter, pages filled with her elegant script, pouring out her heart onto the paper. She wrote about how she'd never felt this way before, how I understood her in a way no one else ever had. I must have read that letter 100 times, memorizing the curves of her letters, the specific phrases she used. It was tangible proof, a physical artifact of our love that I could hold in my hands. It was my most prized possession, more valuable than any real estate or stock certificate. It was an investment in us, a promise of a future I was starting to believe in. Everything was perfect. It was too perfect. I had this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a tiny voice whispering that this level of happiness was unsustainable, that the universe demanded balance. But I silenced it. I drowned it out with her laughter, with the feeling of her hand in mine. I refused to entertain any thought that could puncture our perfect bubble. The heartbreak was coming, of course. It was a freight train barreling down the tracks, and I was standing there, blissfully unaware, admiring the sunset. The summer vacation was supposed to be a temporary hurdle, a 2-month pause before we could resume our perfect life. But it turned out to be the chasm that would swallow us whole. Looking back, it's all so clear. The red flags were practically a parade. But at the time, I was so blinded by love, so high on the sheer newness of it all, that I explained everything away. I was an expert in self-deception, a master of justification. But the truth has a way of cutting through even the thickest fog of denial, and when it finally came, it brought with it a pain so profound it felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. This initial phase, this beautiful, sun-drenched prelude to the disaster, is what makes the betrayal so much sharper. It wasn't just a relationship that ended. It was a world that collapsed. A future I had meticulously started to build in my mind. A future where we'd argue about what color to paint the walls of our first rental. A future where we'd laugh about the time we were so broke we had to choose between dinner and a movie. A future where my biggest worry was finding a good realtor to help us buy our first home. It all vanished. It was an investment that went bankrupt, leaving me with nothing but a crushing weight of emotional debt. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up at night, is that I handed her the knife. I trusted her so completely, so unconditionally, that I never thought to protect myself. I gave her every part of me, holding nothing back, a willing sacrifice on the altar of what I thought was true love. And she took it all, only to shatter it into a million pieces. The memory of that perfect time is both a comfort and a curse, a beautiful ghost that haunts the wreckage of what came after. It's the before that gives the after its devastating power. The summer vacation started on June 10th, and it began just as intensely as our relationship had. The distance felt like a physical ache, a constant pull in my chest. To compensate, we were always connected. The FaceTimes were relentless, a constant stream of digital intimacy. 5 times a day was the minimum, often it was more. We'd wake up and call during lunch, call before bed. We'd fall asleep on the phone, the screen glowing softly in the dark, a tiny digital campfire keeping the loneliness at bay. It felt like we were conquering the distance, proving that our connection was stronger than a few hundred miles. I was so proud of us. I saw it as a testament to our strength, a sign that we were the real deal. In those first few weeks, the bubble remained intact. We talked about the future endlessly. It was our favorite topic. We de-planned our reunion in August, detailing every second of it. We talked about moving in together after college, browsing listings for a small rental apartment, laughing at the outrageous prices and dreaming about how we would decorate it. It was a game, but it felt real. It felt like we were laying the groundwork for a life together. I started thinking in terms of we instead of I. My plans, my ambitions, they all started to revolve around her. It was a massive paradigm shift. My solitary focus on my own survival, on my own financial stability, was being replaced by a shared dream. I even started looking into things like health insurance plans for couples. Ridiculously premature, I know, but that's how certain I was. I was making a long-term investment, and I was sure the returns would be immeasurable. I was putting all my emotional capital into this single venture, a high-risk, high-reward play that I was convinced would pay off. But then slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things started to change. The shifts were tiny, easy to dismiss. A FaceTime call cut short for a vague reason. A text message left unanswered for a few hours longer than usual. A slight coolness in her tone that wasn't there before. I noticed, but I didn't want to. I told myself I was being paranoid, insecure. I reasoned that it was her first real relationship, as she had led me to believe, and maybe she just needed some space, that the initial intensity was bound to level off. I made excuses for her, constructing elaborate narratives to explain away the growing pit in my stomach. She was busy with family, she was stressed, she wasn't feeling well. I became her defense attorney in the court of my own mind, constantly arguing against the mounting evidence. The strange feeling grew, a persistent hum of anxiety beneath the surface of our conversations. The easy, effortless flow we'd had was gone, replaced by a strained quality. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong word would cause a crack in our fragile connection. I started trying harder, showering her with more attention, more affection, hoping I could single-handedly steer us back to the easy bliss of the beginning. But it was like trying to patch a leaking dam with my bare hands. For every crack I sealed, another two would appear. The real heartbreak began not with a bang, but with a slow, creeping erosion of trust and intimacy. It was the death by 1,000 cuts, each small change a tiny betrayal of the connection I thought we had. Then came the day the dam finally broke. It was an ordinary conversation, just another video call. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I must have said something that triggered a moment of honesty, a sudden, shocking crack in her carefully constructed facade. She told me, just like that. She told me that she was already in a relationship with a guy, and not just any relationship, a 7-year relationship. 7 years. The number echoed in my head, a deafening gong of disbelief. 7 years. That was a third of my life. It was an eternity. It was a history, a shared world, a web of connections and memories that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. While I was dreaming of our future in a small rental, she had a whole life, a whole established universe with someone else. My world tilted on its axis. The floor fell out from under me. Every memory we had made, every kiss, every whispered secret was instantly tainted. I wasn't the beginning of a beautiful new story. I was an affair, a sordid little secret. The investment I thought I was making in a blue-chip stock turned out to be a fraudulent scheme. The betrayal was absolute, a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. I felt like a fool, a naive idiot who had been played with expert precision. But then, before I could even process the initial shock, she delivered the line that would become my mantra of self-torture, the phrase that would keep me hooked even as I was bleeding out. She looked me straight in the eye, tears welling up in hers, and said, "But I have never loved someone this much." It was a masterstroke of manipulation, whether she knew it or not. It was the perfect poison, a sweet-tasting lie wrapped around a core of devastating truth. It simultaneously acknowledged the betrayal while positioning me as the grand prize, the exception, the one true love that had finally come along. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, and I clung to it with all my might. She wanted me to stay. After dropping a bomb that obliterated the entire foundation of our relationship, she asked me to stay. And the most pathetic part, I did, I stayed. Leaving her felt impossible, like trying to voluntarily amputate a part of my own soul. The addiction was too strong. The hope, however irrational, that her words were true, that I was the one she truly loved, was too powerful to resist. So I made a conscious decision to walk into the fire. I accepted the pain, the humiliation, the constant, grinding anxiety of being the other man. I put my own self-respect on the line, a willing sacrifice, hoping it would be enough to win her. That month was a special kind of hell. It was a tightrope walk over a canyon of paranoia and deceit. The truth had left a deep, festering wound in my heart, and every interaction we had was like rubbing salt into it. I became an obsessive detective looking for clues, analyzing her every word, her every silence. Her online status became my tormentor. I'd see her online at the same time as him, and my mind would race, imagining the conversations they were having, the pet names they were using, the life they were sharing while I was left in the dark. The late-night calls were the worst. She'd tell me she was going to bed, and then I'd see her active online at 3 a.m. I knew she was talking to him. I knew it in my bones. When I'd confront her, she'd lie. The lies were clumsy, transparent, almost insulting in their simplicity. "Oh, I just woke up to get some water." My phone was acting weird. Each lie was another small heartbreak, another confirmation of my second-class status. It was agonizing to see her doing for him all the things I craved from her: the late-night talks, the unguarded intimacy, the simple act of being her priority. My survival depended on a constant state of denial, but the evidence of my betrayal was everywhere, a constant, mocking reminder of the risk I had taken and the debt of pain I was accumulating. The decision to stay after her confession was the single greatest regret of my life, a catastrophic miscalculation born of desperation and a diluted sense of romanticism. I thought I was fighting for love, making a noble sacrifice for the woman I couldn't live without. In reality, I was just prolonging my own agony, allowing the poison of her betrayal to seep deeper into my system. That month was a masterclass in self-inflicted pain. I was living a lie, and the effort it took to maintain the facade was emotionally bankrupting me. I was running on fumes, my emotional reserves dwindling with each passing day. The heartbreak wasn't a single event anymore. It was a chronic condition, a dull, persistent ache that never went away. The trust we had built, the very bedrock of our connection, had been pulverized, and there was no rebuilding it. How could I believe anything she said when I knew she was living a double life? Every "I love you" was followed by a silent "but you also love him." Every promise of a future together was tainted by the reality of her 7-year history with someone else. I felt like a foolish investor who had poured his life savings into a company he knew was fraudulent, hoping for a miraculous turnaround that was never going to come. I had gambled my emotional credit score on a bad bet, and now I was facing the consequences. The debt was overwhelming. After that initial, torturous month of living with the truth, the dynamic between us began to shift again, this time for the worse. The passion and intensity that had once defined us began to curdle into something sour and resentful. It seemed the thrill of the forbidden had worn off for her, and she was now left with the messy, inconvenient reality of the situation she had created. The distance she started creating wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional. It was a deliberate, calculated withdrawal. The frequent FaceTimes dwindled to sporadic, obligatory check-ins. Her texts became shorter, less affectionate. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling indifference. It felt like she was slowly turning down the thermostat on our relationship, leaving me shivering in the cold. I was no longer the exciting new venture. I was a complication, a problem to be managed. Then came the most absurd, most insulting request of all. She asked me to behave like just simple friends. Simple friends. The phrase itself was a mockery of everything we had been through. How could we be simple friends after sharing the deepest intimacies, after I had rearranged my entire life around the idea of a future with her. It was an impossible ask, a cruel attempt to downgrade my role in her life without having to deal with the messiness of a proper breakup. She wanted to keep me in her orbit, but at a safe distance, a non-threatening presence that wouldn't disrupt her primary relationship. It was a clear sign that I had lost. The risk I had taken had not paid off. I was being relegated to the sidelines, and my sacrifice meant nothing. I refused. I couldn't do it. The idea of seeing her, talking to her, and pretending that my heart wasn't breaking into a million pieces was a form of torture I wasn't willing to endure. This was not a situation that could be salvaged with a platonic friendship. It was all or nothing, and it was becoming increasingly clear that I was going to be left with nothing. The dream of a shared future, of finding the perfect rental and building a life, had evaporated. Talk of real estate and long-term plans felt like a distant, painful memory from another life. The practicalities of a shared life with her other partner, things I could only imagine like a shared health insurance policy or mutual financial investments, stood in stark contrast to my own precarious position. I was a temporary distraction, a fleeting romance, while he was the stable, long-term asset. The survival mode I had been in for a month was no longer sustainable. I was depleted, exhausted from the constant emotional gymnastics required to justify staying with her. The regret was all-consuming. I regretted not walking away the moment she told me the truth. I regretted believing her when she said she had never loved someone so much. I regretted every text, every call, every moment I had wasted on a relationship that was built on a foundation of lies. The betrayal was so profound that it made me question my own judgment, my own ability to read people. I felt like a failure, not just in love, but in life. The days leading up to the end were filled with a tense, unbearable silence. The space between us was thick with unspoken words, with resentment and disappointment. The love and adoration that had once filled that space had been replaced by a toxic smog of negativity. We were orbiting each other at a distance, two celestial bodies whose gravitational pull had been irreversibly broken. The final confrontation was almost mundane, a pathetic whimper at the end of a grand, tragic opera. It happened the day before yesterday. She was angry about something trivial, I don't even remember what. Some minor disagreement that in our happier days would have been resolved with a laugh and a kiss. But now it was a catalyst for all the pent-up frustration and anger to come pouring out. I was trying to reason with her, trying to convince her to bridge the gap that had grown between us. I was still trying to fix it, still trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Her reaction was swift and violent, not in a physically dangerous way, but in its emotional finality. She pushed me away, not a hard shove, but a firm, dismissive gesture that said, "You are nothing to me." She slapped my hand as I reached for her, a sharp, stinging rejection that felt more painful than any physical blow. And then she said the word that finally, irrevocably shattered my last remaining sliver of hope. She called me irritating. Irritating, that's what I had become to her. The man she claimed to love more than anyone, the man for whom she had risked her 7-year relationship, was now just an irritation, an annoyance, a fly to be swatted away. In that single moment, everything became clear. The spell was broken. I saw her not as the flawed, complicated love of my life, but as someone who had used me, who had fed on my affection and was now discarding me because I was no longer convenient. There was nothing left to say. There was no point in arguing, no point in begging. The finality of her actions was absolute. I just turned back. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I was afraid of what I would see in her eyes, pity or worse, indifference. I just turned and went home, each step feeling heavier than the last, the full weight of my heartbreak finally settling upon me. The search for redemption wasn't about winning her back anymore. It was about finding a way to redeem my own self-worth, to reclaim the dignity I had so willingly sacrificed. The walk home was a blur. The sounds of the city, the people rushing past, the traffic, it was all a muted, distant drone. My entire focus had narrowed to the hollow space that had just opened up inside my chest. It was a physical sensation, a cold, empty cavern where my heart used to be. The word irritating played on a loop in my mind, each repetition a fresh stab of pain. It was the ultimate dismissal, a final, brutal summary of my worth in her eyes. I had invested everything, my time, my emotions, my very sense of self, into this relationship, and the return was this single, crushing word. I was not a lover, not a confidant, not even a friend anymore. I was an irritation. The sacrifice I had made, the betrayal I had endured, the constant gnawing regret I had lived with for over a month, it was all for nothing. I got back to my rental, the space I shared with others but had never felt more alone in. The silence in my room was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the wall, replaying the scene over and over again. The push, the slap on my hand, her voice laced with contempt. This was the end. There was no coming back from this. The heartbreak was no longer a dull ache. It was a raw, gaping wound. It was a debt that had finally come due, and the payment was my own emotional devastation. I knew I couldn't just let it end like that, with her final, dismissive word hanging in the air between us. I needed closure. I needed to articulate the sheer scale of the wreckage she had left behind. I picked up my phone, the device that had been both a source of immense joy and unbearable torment, and I started to write. I didn't plan it, I didn't outline it. I just let the words pour out of me, a torrent of pain, anger, and sorrow. 4 paragraphs. It doesn't sound like much, but I poured every last ounce of my emotional energy into them. The first paragraph was about the beginning, about the magic and the hope. I reminded her of the college basement, of the love letter, of the feeling that we had found something truly special. I wanted her to remember the person I was before she broke me, the person who had fallen for her so completely. The second paragraph was about the betrayal. I laid out the pain her confession had caused, the agony of living as her secret, the slow-motion car crash of that month we spent together after the truth came out. I didn't hold back. I described the lies, the late-night calls to him, the feeling of being a second choice, an afterthought. I wanted her to understand the depth of the wound she had inflicted. The third paragraph was about the end, about her pushing me away, about her calling me irritating. I explained how that moment was the final straw, the point of no return. I told her that she had not just broken my heart, but she had shattered my trust in the very concept of love. It was a risk I would be hesitant to take again for a very long time. My emotional credit score was in ruins, and it would take years to rebuild. My survival felt precarious, like I was clinging to a piece of driftwood in a storm-tossed sea. And the final paragraph was goodbye. It was a statement of my own redemption. It was me taking back my power, reclaiming my narrative. I told her that I deserved more than to be someone's dirty secret, more than to be an irritation. I told her that I was choosing myself, choosing my own sanity, my own well-being. I wished her well, a final, bitter act of grace, but I made it clear that my journey with her was over. I wrote that I was closing this investment account, writing it off as a total loss and moving on. There would be no more communication, no more hope, no more waiting by the phone. I hit send. My finger hovered over the button for a second, a moment of hesitation, but then I pressed it. The message delivered instantly, and with that a chapter of my life closed. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer a tense, anxious silence filled with anticipation. It was the quiet of finality, the silence of a tomb. Now it's been almost 48 hours since I last messaged her. 48 hours of a new kind of hell. The urge to check my phone is a constant physical craving. Every notification, every buzz sends a jolt of adrenaline through my body, followed by the crushing disappointment that it's not her. Part of me, the pathetic, hopeful part, still expects a response, an apology, a desperate plea for me to come back. But the other part of me, the rational, wounded part, knows that it's over. I am in the aftermath, surveying the damage. The future feels like a blank, terrifying canvas. The dreams of a shared life, of finding a realtor and navigating the world of real estate together, have been replaced by the stark reality of my own solitude. The focus is back on survival, on figuring out how to get through the next hour the next day. I have to rebuild from scratch, but this time, the foundation is cracked. The heartbreak is a heavy cloak I can't seem to take off. But in the midst of this despair, there is a tiny, flickering flame of something else. It might be pride. Pride that I finally stood up for myself, that I walked away from a situation that was destroying me. It's the beginning of my redemption. It's not about her forgiving me or wanting me back. It's about me forgiving myself for staying too long, for ignoring the red flags, for sacrificing my own dignity. The debt I owe now is to myself, a debt of healing, of self-care, of learning to trust my own instincts again. The road ahead is long, and I know the pain won't disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long time, I am facing in the right direction, away from her and towards myself. Thank you for listening this story. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Click like and subscribe to the Reddit Whispers for more.